Hey,
Hey Pascal, long time no see. How you doing?
not too bad, not too bad. Now, for people on YouTube, you can now go back and watch our golden path.
But just a few seconds ago.
Yeah, all the thousands of people which view our work group discussions. I need to find the agenda.
There are actually there are quite a few views on them, you know. I mean, I'm not talking hundreds, but tens. There are tens of views. That's pretty good. For
Yeah.
for discussions like this, highly technical discussions. I think that's pretty good.
I wonder how they get there, though. We can make an experiment.
Which one is the most viewed?
I don't know. If you are, we can say if you are watching this video, then leave a comment now. And we say this in all of the work groups. And we wait until someone actually comments on a video.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Exactly. Do we have a graphical? We have now a different org, right? A graphical work group thingy.
So the old GraphQL Foundation YouTube is the one that we still continue to use for working groups, and now we have GraphQL TV, which is a new channel just
Yeah.
for our less of this and more of like the highly polished talks.
Mm. Yeah, the graphical TV is great. I mean, of course, the graphical foundation one is also great, but it's a different content.
The most viewed working group is a graphical working group for 20 from 2022 with a
Was
voting
that
total
showing the
of,
new design?
and maybe that's it.
I think that one was quite popular because it was showing off like the new design for graphical, and loads of people got linked to it to see if they liked the new design.
Oh, guys, the table again.
View as HTML. There you go, solved.
Oh, I have to, I have to force merge it again. There's not enough spaces. Michael's not coming today. I don't know about Jane, but Michael told me that I should instead. So my commit message now is adds Pascal and fixes the table. Okay. Who's the host?
I guess that's me. We're still hoping on Shane, maybe. But yeah, you're right. We've passed the 5 minute mark, so let's get started. Um, Hi, folks. Welcome to the April. This is this the second HTTP working group in April?
I think so.
Welcome to the
Yes.
second HTTP working group in April 2026. By being here, we have all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, the code of conduct, And we're aware that the meetings are recorded, published to YouTube for your viewing pleasure, and that we use large language models and AI summary tools to take the notes for us. We'll start with a quick introduction of the attendees, starting with myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji.
I'm Martin.
Hi, Pascal.
Cool. If Shane or Michael drop in, then we can let them introduce themselves as well. You are welcome to take notes during this meeting should you wish, but the AI is also doing its version of what those notes should be. If we think that the AI is not going to do a good job of capturing something, particularly if it's technical or code related, it is still worth putting them in the live notes. So please use the link in the document to do that. Since it's just the three of us, I think we probably won't have any volunteers for that because it's too distracting. Oh yeah, the other thing is grants are available if we need to work on any of these working group topics. The agenda for today is to discuss Appendix A, which proposes the making the application JSON type a not supported by default, dropping it so it's not backwards compatible. But still keeping it as an appendix so we can support legacy servers via an appendix. And the other one is whether we should do persisted documents by default. So let's start with Martin.
Right, let's go. Appendix A. So it's about, as you said, both response types. So we have the current application JSON, and we have the new one, which is GraphQL response plus JSON that allows better status codes. And right now in the spec, both are possible, and both have some on an equality basis, like you can decide to use one or the other. This pull request proposes that we encourage people to use the new GraphQL response plus JSON, and the main changes it's doing is it's effectively requiring every new server, every server that wants to support the spec, to support the new media type. Because the other one is still around, we keep it, but we keep it as an appendix, so it gives a clear path forward towards the new and the single media type. If we go there, well, it's a big pull request. If you look in the details, yeah, 200 lines. It's mostly changing, moving text around, like all this text is just moving around. The changes are, what are the changes? In the client part, there is now this paragraph here that says a client should support both, and to do that, it should send an accept header with both media type. There is already the same paragraph for server, and yeah, and this is the bulk of the change here, which is we go from a server must support responses using at least one of to a GraphQL server must support responses using the new media type. I think that's it. So it looks like a big change, but really it's not. The main change is this one. And that's all I have.
Okay, so interestingly, you flipped the wording for the client rather than indicating. So at the moment, we require that a new client, must include the application GraphQL response JSON, except header. You've reworded the paragraph after that to say it should support receiving, which is an interesting thing to say because a client shouldn't see any real difference between those two media types. at the end of the day, they both encode JSON and the JSON bodies are identical. So it's a really, I think it's quite sort of weird and strange to say it that way. What the previous text said in that position was that you must include this media type. Like you have to include the new one, because if your server supports it, then you want to say, yeah, I support it too, because it's just JSON at the end of the day. Who cares?
Yeah.
And
That
then
that's still there. If you go on line
yeah,
242,
no, it's still there. I agree.
it's still
Like
there.
I
Yeah.
can, yeah. I'm reading it from the diff. And then what it then said is that it's recommended, unless you know that your server definitely implements the new media type, you should also include application JSON in the content type header. So I think that was better wording for this. Could you explain why you changed it to be the other way around?
To be honest, I think what I did is just take I wanted it to be symmetrical with the server side of thing, and I took the server paragraph. Actually, let me share my screen. For the server, it says for maximal compatibility, a server should support using both blah blah blah. And I took over this paragraph and I tried to make something similar for clients. Right. This is how it's. But no strong feeling. To be honest, here I'm perfectly okay to change that wording. So the wording would be something more like a client should set the accept header to also include application JSON or something like this. Is that what we're saying?
Well, so the spec as it stands prior to this pull request essentially says that clients must say, I support the new type. And if they don't know otherwise, they should also say, and I support JSON. And to be honest, they should just always say that with the spec as it currently stands, not with the one you're proposing, just to be clear. So in that case, basically everyone should just always say, I accept JSON, whether it be the new type of JSON or the old one. It's the same thing. And then all a client does, right, is it just does JSON decode and it just uses that. It throws away, the content type doesn't matter so long as it's JSON. It doesn't care about the status code or anything. It's literally just using that JSON body. So from a client's perspective, I think it should just say the previously existing text, which was fairly accurate. However, if we make the change that you're proposing, which is that we say that the server must support the new media type, then there is no point in saying that a client must indicate support for the old media type, because we've said that a server must do the new one. And if a server must do the new one, then there's no need to support the old one because it must do it, right? We can rely on it to do that. The main thing that, or the difference in symmetry, the reason for this, right, is that we wanted existing GraphQL servers to support spec non-compliant clients. Because many people just use like window.fetch as a GraphQL client, and that's fine, or curl as a GraphQL client, and that's fine. We want to be like maximally accepting of requests where we can. So that's why there wasn't the symmetry there. And so essentially we just say to the server, hey, your client's going to indicate to you what it supports. If it says it supports the new stuff, great, send it with status codes and stuff. If it says it just supports JSON, absolutely fine, just give it JSON. If it says nothing of that regard, here's what you should do in those circumstances as well for like maximum compatibility. So that was the intent of the existing system.
I think I still wanted the application JSON accepts media type to be included in the normative part and not have it in appendix, because it's a good default for most clients. Like this is what Apollo Kotlin is going to be for the next 5 years. It's still going to send application JSON. And probably Apollo iOS is going to do the same, and Apollo client. Like for clients, it's still a very good default. So I kind of wanted this to not be in the appendix. And this is why I put it in this paragraph here.
Okay, so
Because
I think the existing wording still achieves that goal, right?
oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Definitely. I can rephrase that. We
Because
need to remove
go on.
sorry. We need to remove the part that says if the client knows that the server supports the new media type, well, we can remove that sentence and just start with it is recommended that the client set the accept header to wait. No, we can also remove that word.
So in your change to this, you're basically saying a server must support the new media type.
Yes.
So what you want to say here is like, if you don't know that the server implements this specification, because your specification now says like that you must support it, right? So the only time that you would ever need to add application JSON is if they don't implement this spec. That's
Yeah.
what you're saying, which to be clear, I still disagree with, but nonetheless, like supporting it from the point of view of like, let's assume this is the case, you want to say, if you don't know that the server implements this specification, then you should include application JSON for maximal like legacy compatibility.
Yep. Sounds good.
But it's not like just to repeat myself again, it's not about the client receiving. It's very much about telling the server what to do rather than what the client receives.
Yep. Makes sense. Yeah, I can rephrase that.
Okay, so then you've removed the bit that says that the new media type adds improved support because like it's the only media type that you support in this version by default. So you don't need to say that, it's redundant. That makes sense. Cool. So the main then remaining discussion around this is should we require support for the new media type or not? There are advantages of of requiring the new media type, right? I'm not denying that. Like basically it means everyone will be able to support status codes and know that the response that's coming back is from GraphQL. That was the just for the people watching on YouTube, the main reason that GraphQL used the 200 status code for most everything was because if you get a status code back that's not in the 2xx range, if it was a 4xx or a 5xx, then we don't know that that's come from GraphQL. It might have come from an intermediary server, and it doesn't necessarily conform to GraphQL semantics. So we needed the 200 to say, this is definitely GraphQL. What we do with the new media type is we say, this is definitely GraphQL. That's what the media type tells you. So now you can use whatever status code makes sense. And this is definitely what everyone should be doing going forwards. And it's what we say as the recommendation. We recommend that every server should implement this new media type. It's not too much trouble to support. It just means being a bit more careful with your status codes. So your change is essentially saying every server must support this. And essentially what that does is it drops it arguably drops backwards compatibility for existing servers. So there are a lot of servers out there where people have, rather than using an off-the-shelf server like GraphQL Yoga or Apollo Server or any of the other many GraphQL off-the-shelf servers, there are many people that literally just copied like 10 lines of code into their applications, and that is their GraphQL server. And it literally just does like JSON parse, and then it feeds it into the GraphQL implementation, and that's basically it. There's not much more to it than that at all. And those, we have no way of measuring like how many of them there are out there, but we strongly suspect it's quite a lot because it was in like the actual documentation for quite a number of different implementations over the years. So we're basically saying in this that none of them are spec compliant, which I would say, yeah, they're not compliant with the future of where we think we should go. The reason we're doing this, that I understand, is that we want to make it so that everyone can use HTTP status codes, which makes sense, and it is what we should be doing by default. But HTTP status codes do not really serve the client. They're not there for the client at all. You should just read the JSON and act based on the JSON. The status code is irrelevant. If you look at, for example, the network adapter for Relay in the Relay documentation, it's literally send a request here, take the JSON, feed it into Relay. That's it. Like there's no looking at the status code or anything like that. And that's how it should be. Essentially, there should be a slight validation there, which should be either it gives you a 200 status code or it gives you the new content type so you know that it's GraphQL and you can trust it. But other than that, like that's the only validation a client should need. Was it definitely from GraphQL? Yes, JSON parse, process that. So who is this change benefiting? Who is the change, this must, that we're making people do to be spec compliant? Who is it benefiting? It's benefiting them, right? It's them. It's the people on the server. They get to use the status codes, which means that all their IDSs, all their caches, all of their observability, any other server things that they have in their server-side pipeline, those are the things that benefit from status codes. So if they want that, then they can and should have it. And that's what the current spec says. You should implement this. My issue is we are basically saying that all of these existing servers are spec non-compliant because they don't implement this. And we're essentially making them, if they want to be spec compliant, we're making them do something that they don't necessarily want to do because they don't need to do. And the new version is like a little bit more complex. You have to read a bit more text about it. It's not anywhere near as simple as the old one, which was basically just run GraphQL and send it as a result as a 200. So we are basically saying you have to make this change, even if you're not going to be the one benefiting from it. And the other major issue that I have with this is essentially GraphQL has a large number of selling points. One of the things that you'll see on like Reddit and stuff all the time is like GraphQL solves overfetching and underfetching, and they think that that's the main reason for GraphQL. But there is so many reasons to GraphQL, and one of the key ones is versionless, right? It's non-breaking. Every version of GraphQL since like 2012, when Facebook were using it internally and hadn't opened it yet, is still been like retroactively supported. And we are, and I don't understand why, really, choosing to make this one word change to the spec that essentially says, no, never mind all that, never mind all this backwards compatibility, we don't need it, we don't want it. It just feels wrong to put a breaking change like this into the GraphQL over HTTP specification when it doesn't really serve anyone, or I don't feel like it serves anyone. I feel like it's only a negative. If we started GraphQL again today, we would make this be a must, definitely. But we're not starting GraphQL today. There's like 11 years of legacy. So I'm still unconvinced.
We don't have a spec right now, though. Like we haven't released it. Like we're not breaking a spec technically. We're breaking a draft.
We're breaking the contract that people have implemented throughout basically the history of GraphQL usage.
Actually, we're not breaking anything because those people can still keep using what they're doing. Like, and I suspect this is going to happen for the next 5 years or so. Like, we're not breaking the people doing JSON.parse. Like, they can keep doing it, and it's going to work perfectly with Apollo Kotlin, Apollo client, until we remove the application JSON from accept, but probably not going to happen in the foreseeable future. I don't know, maybe there will be no developer job by the time it happens. I don't know. So I think the thing is, if we encode application JSON in the spec right now, like in the V1, we are going to live with it for the next 20 years, like forever. We cannot remove it ever. Like this is our only chance at a clean state. And I disagree. It's only for the backend people. I think it's really for everyone because everyone uses developer tools, uses network inspector and proxies. And if you have to remember a branch, like most people will get lost, like I will get lost for sure. It took me a very long time to understand how to parse a response because of this 200 thing and application JSON and everything. And I think it's better for, yeah, for everyone really, not just the backend people.
I think that's a really good point about the debugging tools. And it's one that wasn't covered by what I was saying before. Like for the client, I stand by what I said. The client should basically ignore the status code if it's got the content type header. But for a developer looking in the debug tools, absolutely. Like it would be really useful to have 294, this is a partial success, versus 200, this was a complete success, versus 400, this was invalid. We do have some of that already, but like it would be like really helpful, I think, for people getting started. But keep in mind, this is still like the recommended practice for the spec. So all you're doing here is just trying to make it required, whilst also saying, well, it's not required anyway because people can continue to use their existing servers, which, yeah. But I guess
Yeah,
the
people
main
can
the
do
main
stuff.
difference here is that we're saying that a new server that's implemented doesn't need to support any legacy clients out of the box. It can choose to, but it doesn't have to. Um,
But it's recommended. It's
well, it's
approved.
not. If you make it an appendix, it's not recommended.
What's exact wordage here? For maximal compatibility, a server should support using both the application JSON and the new media type for responses. And then there is a note that redirects to Appendix A for application JSON.
That seems weird. But nonetheless, okay. So I want to propose another thing structurally, but I'll save that for a minute till we get to the end of this current discussion. So, okay, you've made a good point, which is that essentially this is serving um, developers as well, like for debugging, and I think that's true. And then your other point was essentially who are we actually breaking? So let me just think about that for a moment. So if you release a new server today that complies with this spec but doesn't implement the legacy, then, well, presumably if it's a new server, you don't have any clients, you don't have any legacy to support. What it does mean is that your developers will only be able to use clients that support this new spec with it, which does potentially rule out things like just using like curl on the command line without knowing off by heart. You can't do like curl double hyphen JSON. You now have to do curl -h application slash GraphQL dash response plus JSON, which is quite like I struggled with that for a moment there, and I wrote it. So so I am worried that it just makes GraphQL like a little harder to use in all these various places that it is used like that for very little benefit because it's really not much effort for a server to support application JSON. It really isn't. Like it's like 5 lines of code, maybe 3. If you're already supporting the other media type, it's like just change the status codes to 200 and you're done. Like that's and the response type. Like that's literally the only.
It's a lot of work for all the tooling ecosystem. Like if you're an observability middleware, you are the Datadog of GraphQL, I don't know, whatever, and you want to display a warning for the malformed GraphQL responses, it means you now have to support 2 cases. It's basically multiplying by 2 the effort everywhere.
Right. But if you don't do that, then it is a breaking change, and anyone who's sending those old queries through, we're breaking. So you have to pick a side. Is it breaking or
Yeah.
not?
The thing is, the breaking change will have a certain duration and it can be remediated. The keeping everything, we integrate, the cost over the lifetime of the project. If we do the breaking change now, we change the draft, and we decide to break things now. Some project, I suspect not that many, but some project will have issues and they will have to fix it. And they will have 6 months to 1 year, I suspect, of like a bit of intermediate state where it's going to be painful. And people will go on Twitter and will rant about like the status code or whatever. But the long term, like if we're saying GraphQL is here for 20 years, it means we still have 19 years of good, clean HTTP spec where no one is going to ask the question about media types. So over the time of the project, the cost, like the overall cost, I think is better to like just make it one shot and never look back compared to paying the price 10 years from now.
It is an interesting point. I'm not sure I'm fully sold, but I will definitely think about it quite deeply. I also would like to think a little bit more about like what it means for simple clients, for like command line clients, because there's a lot of like throwaway clients like that. And I think arguably the answer to that is like send a pull request to curl, send a pull request to wget. Like let's add a double hyphen GraphQL flag.
I mean, but is that really an issue? Like if you send with accept star dot star, star slash star, sorry, like you will get back GraphQL response plus JSON and it should work.
That is a good point. Presumably, if you actually implement the accept headers as they are stated in the RFCs, then yes, you would be allowed to respond with any. That would then mean that your script is potentially unreliable, though. So let's circle back to that because I think that's an interesting discussion and it relates to the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So I quite like originally when you said about splitting this off into an appendix, I quite like the idea. It's the breaking change that I have the issue with rather than the restructure. I was thinking about this more, and I think actually each of our media types should be their own chapter. And the reason for this is I've been thinking more about like incremental delivery, for example, which might want to use, for example, the JSON-L media type. And we might also want one for multi-part as well. And the way that you respond in each of these ways, potentially even one for like WebSockets. I don't know whether it makes sense to do what Dennis has done at the moment, where WebSockets is like a different specification, but also like event stream, right? Each of these are different ways of encoding the GraphQL response over HTTP. And they will have quite significant amounts of shared rules, right? The JSON body will always be basically the same JSON body, no matter which of these different methods you respond with. For application JSON versus application GraphQL response plus JSON, it's the status code is broadly the thing that changes. For JSON-L, you're going to get like JSON responses, but you're going to get multiple of them on each line. And now you need to have like a higher level concept that says about how to handle that. For WebSockets, you have the same kind of thing where you've now got a stream with these on it. For multi-part, similarly, and it gets even more interesting if you start using it for like file uploads and stuff as well. So I've been wondering whether it makes sense to have a chapter per content type. So essentially, this Appendix A that you've done would just become a chapter. It can be Appendix A. We can do them all as appendices, right? We can have each media type be an appendix, like it, whatever. That's not really the important part. The important part is that they're their own whole entire section. Have you folks thought about that? Like, I know Pascal that you've done quite a lot of in Hot Chocolate. You've done the different media types. You've done JSON-L, and you've done multi-part, right?
Yeah, so I haven't implemented the transport, so that's a question I have to refer to Michael. 1 second. Mike, no, I'm kidding. So he will probably try next time. Then he can answer this question, or you do it asynchronously.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. No worries. So yeah, I'd love to get more like input on that style of things as well, because I think that is definitely one of the things we should consider if we are like restructuring. Um,
But it doesn't solve the issue of like what are we highlighting? Like if we have 10 different media types, do we want to keep supporting 10 in the future? I think I think we don't. Like even for WebSocket, like the reason subscriptions are a big pain points with GraphQL is because we have three different WebSocket protocols, and the naming completely sucks. You have the GraphQL. What is it? I don't even want to think about it. But just having one protocol, like moving forward, would be preferred, I think.
so strong disagree. I think, for example, the different protocols have different trade-offs. Like WebSockets versus, for example, multipart. Like those are very different things. Especially like if you need to support HTTP 1.1, then things are different as well. If you want to go through proxies like Nginx, then they have like different trade-offs. There's like if you do, for example, server sent events, then you would need a second channel for either you'd have a stream per stream.
I'm down with that. What I don't want is a different version of WebSockets. I don't want GraphQL WG with a subscription, whatever, sub protocol, and then have the Apollo protocol with GraphQL WG as a protocol. This is massively painful.
Right, but like if you look at what we've done until this pull request, what we've done is essentially encapsulated what the status quo is. So what we would do for WebSockets would be incorporating essentially Dennis's protocol, unless there are critical issues with it. The main reason that the old WebSockets protocol was removed was because it had quite significant issues in the way that it functioned. Like as I my memory of this is weak, so don't take this as gospel, but like there was security issues. There was like the ability to replay the like introductory payload. There was a whole bunch of like ambiguities around it that caused it to be problematic. And Dennis like spotted these and went like, here's a new, fresh, cleaner protocol that fixes all this. And like the whole ecosystem has essentially moved to this. Some people are still using the old one just because they have legacy systems, and legacy systems can live basically forever. But I don't think we'll end up with like 8 different copies of WebSocket protocols. I think we would just have one that ultimately will be the one that we move into the GraphQL over HTTP spec. That said, I think that there is value in having a WebSocket spec and also having a non-WebSockets spec
Yeah, yeah.
because, yeah. So like JSON-L was one of the proposed media types for this, and it has a lot of advantages in terms of like lightness. It's incredibly like efficient. There's like a new line character between each payload, and that's it basically. But it's not without its own trade-offs as well, I'm sure. Like multipart, for example, is much larger in between payloads, but it's also much more standard, so it's easier to support potentially, you know. So we'll see where that goes. But I imagine that we're at least going to get server sent events and WebSockets added to GraphQL over HTTP at some point, and probably JSON-L as well. And again, like the trade-offs for like incremental delivery might make sense over just a regular HTTP, whereas subscriptions probably more over WebSockets, but no reason that you can't do everything over WebSockets. Like it's all just trade-offs. And our job is just to increase interoperability here. Okay, so I wanted to talk about that before we circled back to that previous discussion, but allow me to move us on to the next topic since we only have about 19 minutes left anyway. And that is persistent documents by default. If we're looking at what we want GraphQL to be in 20 years, like you described, like what should things be looking like? One of the key things that I think we should have done when we launched GraphQL, like, is make it so that by default we only support persistent queries, we only support trusted documents. And at the moment, I've written up the like spec pull request to GraphQL over HTTP to handle trusted documents, but it's a bit weird because we say in the main spec that like a GraphQL request must include X, Y, and Z. And then in the like appendix for adding trusted documents, we're like, actually forget that. You don't need query anymore. You just need ID instead. It's a bit weird. It feels like this should be baked in from the start. And like by default, you should support either ID or query. And you are perfectly allowed to just reject anything that has a query, but be aware that if you do so, it's going to break these other things, these other concerns.
So what are we talking here? Are we talking persistent query only or persistent query supported?
Persistent queries by default.
What does that mean?
Yeah, that would be the recommended. It would
Yeah, sure,
be
but like there's a whole step on deployment to support persistent queries.
Right. Absolutely. There is like a whole extra thing that needs to exist around this, which I think Martin mentioned previously as well. This is something we need. We need a standard around trusted documents that makes it easy for people to integrate this into their flows. But it should just be a standard, right? It should be, for example, that you send a particular post request with some kind of secret to your server and it encodes it in this way, or that your service capabilities indicate an endpoint that you should be sending your trusted docs to and what name of a secret should be shared with it or whatever. There should be a standard around the management of trusted documents.
But it's opt-in, right? We don't require every GraphQL deployment to support that.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the HTTP spec, what it would say is effectively you must support either ID or query or both. We recommend you support ID. You may support query essentially. So like
No. No, you may support queries. So we want to disallow sending queries by default. Like if you're completely spec compliant if you only accept ID.
correct.
Yeah, that's not how, no. Like, what about the development? Like in
Yeah.
development, I don't want to send a persistent operation. I
Why
want to
not?
send it.
Let's make that better. Like in my services, I use trusted documents in development. It works great. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. And depending on what your setup is, like it may be more challenging to implement, in which case you implement the may, but you turn it on only for development.
But again, where do we want to have this? We want to have this in
The
the,
GraphQL over HTTP spec.
yes, and we say may have a query.
We allow deployments that are 100% using listed queries.
Yeah, may.
Yes. Which I personally think like production servers for first-party applications should only support trusted documents. I think that's the status today. Like that is what 95+% of GraphQL servers should be doing in production, only supporting trusted documents.
Depends, right?
It does depend. It
It,
depends if you're a
it,
public
it,
API or a first-party API.
no, if it depends if you're if you have a consuming application. If you are, you can be a first-party API, which just is there for people to consume inside of your company.
Right. Okay, so yeah, there's three classifications. So I'm talking about APIs that are exposed to the public internet, of which first-party API for your own applications or third-party API where you're like GitHub or Shopify or whatever, and you want to expose your GraphQL API for third-party developers to integrate against. There is also obviously internal tooling. That's a whole different like kettle of fish. That has significantly different like security requirements around it. And for them, like yeah, you make your choice there whether you want that to be trusted docs or not.
Yeah, I
Essentially,
have,
internal tooling is a public API internal to your application, internal to your company network.
well, not necessarily, right? Um, I have whitelisted introspection support through for authorized users, even for specific users in the past. So it's like
But you may do that. That's the point, right? This is it. This is the exception. Like you can, yes, of course, you can add exceptions for certain users. You can add exceptions if they're an API integration partner. You can add exceptions if they pay you enough. Like, sure, you can always add exceptions, but like we're talking about the default behavior.
yeah, but can you repeat again how you want to write this into the specification?
So your server must support ID or query or both. You should support ID and you may support query.
Why would we add the last two bits? Like your server must support ID or query or both.
Yep.
Done. It's the transport specification. It's not about best practices. Your server
Is
must
it not? Is it not? So why are we forcing a breaking change into the existing stuff then if it's not about best practices? Because that's what the other pull request is doing, right?
You mean the one with the
The content type.
yeah. So I think there's a very different thing here because one excludes a whole category. Like every time, I don't know how I feel about this. I generally agree that 90, probably 9% of the graphical servers out there should probably, no, that's not true. 99% of the production graphical servers out there should probably use persistent operation.
Is it the case today? Like, do we have a vague idea of the percentage?
No,
The
like,
percentage that do or the percentage that should, Martin?
No, that do today. Like
the
today,
Oh, I
percentage.
think it's very low.
Yeah,
it's less
we
than
can
50,
check.
right?
This is trusted documents is a much bigger problem than status codes to my mind. Much bigger.
Yeah, but that had nothing to do with the graphical over HTTP specification. That's like, this is just like now suggesting that, like, for me, I agree with the sentiment. I agree with the statement. 100% I'm with you. I even have, one second, where's my wallet? I have you always with me everywhere. Just so you know, with your business card, I do 100% agree that 99% of the servers out there should support it. On the other hand, for me, the differentiating factor of GraphQL, one of the biggest things is introspection and queries. I think it's wrong to discourage this in the specification how the transport works by saying it should provide an ID and may provide a query.
What if
Like,
we said it should provide
but why
ID and it should provide a query in development?
but why does it care about this? Why do we need to add the complexity of this? Like if I read the specification and I read that it must accept ID or query or both. I know that it must accept ID or query or both. Like it's a very simple instruction. I send ID, I send query, or I send both. And then I have this thing in the end which says I should, what is it? I should accept ID, I may accept query.
Yeah, okay. So the word should in the RFCs is equivalent to the word recommend. So we recommend that you support ID. Like
Yes.
that's essentially the word, right? I use the word should, but the word recommend is equivalent. We recommend that you do ID. We recommend trusted documents. Like this is what we're recommending to you.
But the the sentence just before says that I have to support ID anyway.
No, it doesn't. It says you have to support either ID or
It
or query or both.
well, it depends on how you lay this out, right? Because it could also be that per request.
Yeah,
Either
probably both.
you either send an ID or you send a query or you send both, but your server has to allow all three. Like it's a valid payload to send an ID, it's a valid payload to send a query, it's a valid payload to send an ID and the query.
Yes, so we would need to be very careful in the way that we write this. But essentially, we would need to also, I think, standardize an endpoint that you can probe to find out what one your server is. And like
What
this is one of the things where service capabilities come in.
why do I have to probe if I can send an why do I have to probe this?
If you are pointed at a GraphQL endpoint
Yes.
at the moment, um, you don't really have much. You don't know where to send trusted documents, right?
I send a query.
Right. You send a query, you get back an error because it only supports trusted documents. What do
Then
you
I
do with that
cannot
error?
communicate with the server.
Right. So if we want to support trusted documents by default, we need to do something a bit better than that, right? But also, like even in the status quo, even without trusted documents, if you like talk to a server, you don't know that subscriptions should be sent over WebSockets to a particular URL. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff. So in the golden path, my aim is that we, through the service capabilities stuff, will be able to indicate to a client, hey, this is your, like you basically say, here's my GraphQL endpoint. It's example.com/GraphQL. And the client should be able to go, okay, example.com/GraphQL, tell me about yourself. And you go, oh, I implement this version of the GraphQL spec and I support WebSockets over here and I require trusted documents and they should be registered ahead of time at this URL. And, I also support fragment arguments, any other stuff, right? And now your client can configure itself. Not you as a user. You don't need to know all these different settings. You just point your client at it and it should just do it for you. And that should be done by the client. It should be done by the tooling for code generation, whatever. But someone's going to do that, right? Someone's going to find out what the answers are for this endpoint. At the moment, if you want to know whether fragment arguments are supported, you have to probe for that. Like you
Yeah,
don't know.
that's all fine. But is this GraphQL over HTTP or not?
Yes. It has to be because all you're given, or in the ideal world, right, you would say, I have a GraphQL client and I know what my GraphQL endpoint is, and you would give your GraphQL endpoint to your GraphQL client. And it would then be down to the client to figure everything else out. That's the promise of GraphQL introspection, right? But it doesn't deliver on it because GraphQL introspection doesn't cover enough stuff. Because GraphQL introspection only talks about the schema, it doesn't talk about the service. What GraphQL over HTTP is exposing the service over HTTP. So now, yes, there should be a way of discovering this. We have needed this for years, and we've got around it by literally just like passing information via humans. Like, hey, we do support subscriptions over WebSockets. You need to use the WS Link middleware. Oh, we do support this. I don't know, other things. We don't support this new GraphQL syntax feature yet, so
Yeah,
you'll need to
but
transpile that.
that's capabilities, right? I see. I understand the argument. I don't understand the link because server capabilities, yes, I see 1,000 use cases. I just don't. I have like I don't. I'm not there yet.
Okay, but like imagine that, for example, you must also, in addition to the above, support specifically this one introspection query, which gives you the service capabilities. Or even not even must. I think should would be fine, or should in
And
development.
supporting, I can see a use case where people support both.
One second. 1 second. If so, you're saying that okay, we would have to define a query which would be allowed on all servers to be executed to figure out if the capabilities of the server. So we would specifically allow an introspection query. We should. So we recommend.
I don't think we would do that. That was just a thing I came up with on the spot. But no, I think we would just add an endpoint. Like we are planning to specify
The
that
schema,
persisted queries go through like /GraphQL/p/hash/operation name. Like that's the proposed URL structure. And you could just have like /GraphQL/capabilities, right? And then you just do a GET request to it. And
yeah.
if they're turned on, you can retrieve them. It's just JSON at the end of the day, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the thanks. I think that's way more sane because
Yeah.
otherwise we essentially like I mean that would be really smelly because then we would essentially say that we actually don't allow queries except for this one because we
Yeah,
need
which
this
would be really weird. Yeah. So
because we
so
need this
so
one
keep in
for the rest
mind,
of the work.
like I completely ruled out doing anything like this because this spec was not meant to be a breaking change at all. But if we are happy to put a breaking change in, if we are planning to make it so that in 20 years' time, the GraphQL that we dictate today is the one that like does all the things, I believe that that version should have trusted documents in it by default. The vast majority of people should be using trusted documents. So if we're gonna make a breaking change, let's like make it count. Let's make it serious. Let's make it do something powerful and important and actually move the needle on trusted documents because honestly, it's one of the biggest problems in the GraphQL space is like people not doing trusted documents, then having all these different like query complexity issues and then having to like do like the IBM complexity spec or depth limits and then depth limits don't really work because then there's breadth and then there's like there's so much complexity. It's so easy for a malicious GraphQL user to like figure out which of your fields are the most expensive and then try and make sure that they are all present in the same query in such a way that none of the heuristics match. Whereas if it's only your own engineers who are writing queries, they're not going to write queries like that are hugely expensive generally. So it solves so many of those kind of problems. It's what everyone should be doing and they're not doing, and we should make it A, easier, and B, default.
Yeah, I like I like it's not me. We all build graphical tooling for a living. I don't see the persistent query problem to be as simple as this, as just an endpoint where I push queries to. Like this gives a complete wrong, like, yes, protecting your API with persistent query is what everyone should do. But that is just, oh, now it's my hand up. That's interesting. Does this work as well? No. Oh no, it does. Oh no.
I I hear what you're saying. Like I agree, it's not just this. And I think one of the things that like the capabilities would be exposing is what is the method through which you support persistent queries, right? Which one do you use? It might be store it to this particular folder in this shared mono repo that we have. It might be send it to some remote endpoint. It might be and keep in mind, I use the word trusted documents here deliberately as opposed to persistent queries, because some of the forms of trusted documents aren't this at all, right? They are, for example, signing, like having like a signature that the client can apply to a query so that the server can validate the signature and know that it was trusted by the developers at the time that the application was bundled, which doesn't involve sending the queries ahead of time. So there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing that. And if we support that as well, right? Keep in mind that also doesn't mean that ID would be required because like query would be required in this case, but also signature or whatever. Like what this ends up being might be different. But if we want to break things anyway, like let's do something serious. Let's actually like fix a major problem.
mm,
Could we add a provision because it might take some time to get everyone to agree on persisted queries? Could we add a provision right now in the spec that query is not required if you have another way to retrieve the document? I know it sounds a bit like a stretch, but keep our
I just don't see why it has anything to do with a GraphQL over HTTP. I just fail to see this because it's
because we require query in a valid HTTP query. You need to parse the request, and the request must have a query.
yeah, but this is something that we can now. I agree, this is wrong. We should say what Benji said. Uh, it's either an ID query or both, right? I just don't. The only thing I disagree with is that the concept persistent query should be part of the transport specification because it has absolutely nothing to do with transport. It's behind the transport, right? You just don't send the query, but that's fine. Like or maybe it's just me now having a problem with this. I don't know. Like isn't the persistent query thing just that I send an ID and the query gets executed? But this has nothing to do with the transport. The transport is I just send an ID. So does this really is the whole persistent query complexity that we have with identifying, like you already more or less defined the standard, Benji, with the hash, the hash name and the hash name colon hash and so on. That's all fine. Like this is the standard and whatever. But the whole how is this stored? Where is this stored? How do we integrate it? And all of these things which the ecosystem tries to solve since years, right? Um, is this is this really something that belongs into the transport specification? Because the transport specification is just about transport, right?
So I think it does, but not fully. So let me expand on that. And we are at time, so I understand if you need to disappear. But essentially, the main reason, like the main argument that I hear from people, I've been banging this trusted documents drum for a long time, right? I've heard all the reasons why people can't do it. The main reason is like it's just too hard, right? It's too hard to integrate it into your website build pipeline or into your app build pipeline or like everything that you want to do, like even just extracting the documents from your client can be challenging. Like the new Apollo Client v4, for example, I was talking to the engineers at last year's GraphQL Conf, and they were saying that essentially we can't just extract them. Like we have to run through all of the routes in order to generate the queries so we know which ones need to be persisted. So like there is complexity in it. And once you've done that, once you've got your documents, there's no like, there's no answer to the what do I do with them? Every, excuse me, everything is institutional knowledge, right? So for some people, it might be you commit it to your shared Git monorepo. For some of them, it's like you push to Reddit. For some of them, it's you've got Reddit. Did I say Reddit? Redis.
I always put my query to Reddit. So
For some people, it's like, you've got like GraphQL Hive or whatever, and you put it to an endpoint there or Apollo. I forget what the Apollo service is called, but like to the Apollo place for storing these kind of documents, with a file that like a manifest, I think it's called, where you like have them all defined. Like different people have different solutions for this problem. And this makes it hard, right? The whole point of GraphQL is to increase interoperability, to make clients work with servers, and we're all solving this one problem in like all of the different ways.
yes, but
So
now to make things sane, wouldn't it be better to just say that to be compliant with the GraphQL with the golden path, you have to have support for this file format in persistent operations. Done.
yes, except you also need to tell your client that. You need to
Why?
indicate to your client that.
Why? Because it would be bundled with my server binary, which I put into a Docker image and then push to Kubernetes. It's absolutely
So what
irrelevant.
you've just described is every time a client needs to be deployed, your server has to be rebooted with a new Docker image or
Even
whatever.
worse, what I say is that every time I deploy my client, you have to run the build pipeline of your server to then publish the gateway.
So
And
this is
then
why we shouldn't do that. Yeah, because it doesn't have to be that hard. Like it's literally you can push a document with an identifier somewhere. We just need a protocol that says what are the different types of things it can be. Push a file over HTTP, push a file into Git, push a file onto, I don't know, Dropbox, whatever. Here's the three modes or whatever. And each of those can have their own standards, right? And then those standards can live somewhere else. They don't have to be in the HTTP spec. The
I mean,
only
it can
thing
just be
the
a link.
HTTP spec
It can
needs,
essentially just be a link to it could the capabilities just link to the docs how you do it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Custom and then a URL, sure. But the main thing is that if you use like one of the more standard ways of doing this, which is presumably going to be like the upload a standard file format to your hosting provider of choice, which is we could support as an industry, right? And we wouldn't be losing out because we all support this functionality, but in different ways. Let's just support it in the same way and just enable our customers. Then it's just like what endpoint is it and which secret do I look up in my secret store so that I know what password to use to send along with it or whatever. Um,
But that's like I just don't it's persistent operations are so much more complicated than this. It's not a file which you upload. I mean, it's more than one file. Because if you have one client and one server, if you have one client for your GraphQL server, then you can also, then it's easier for you to just redeploy the gateway, redeploy your server whenever your front end changes. But if you have a mobile app and you have a web app and you have a TV and a watch, then it's 4 files. It's not one file. So I don't have a file that I can upload to a blob storage.
But each of your clients has one file. I don't care that there's 4 clients. Each client has its own like each one you've had to tell what the GraphQL endpoint is. And then when you build it, when you deploy the watch app, it takes its queries and it sends them to an endpoint. I'm not saying it overwrites the endpoint. I've not told you about my KJSON-L thing, but basically it's an interchange format like JSON-L, but for key-based things. So like the hash is like a prefix essentially. And what you can do with that is a dictionary merge, right? You literally like can read 2 streams at the same time. It doesn't even matter if they're multiple gigabytes. It literally doesn't matter. It just reads them, and when a new hash exists in one that doesn't exist in the other, it gets merged in, right? In like a linear merge. So that, from a pure file point of view, can do it. Also, you can just send a file, a KJSON-L file or whatever else to your endpoint that says, here is all my documents and their hashes, right? And your endpoint can then say, okay, great. On my server, I handle this via Redis. So I'm just going to go through every entry in that file and I'm going to write it to Redis. Or it says I handle it via MySQL. So I'm going to write it to rows in this table. Or it says I handle it through MongoDB and it writes it to MongoDB. Or I handle it through the file system. So it writes each of these individual files out as hash number.graphql to a file on the thing. It can do whatever it wants. But the main thing is that when you do your client build, you end up with a list of operations and their hashes, and you send them somewhere, somehow, right?
Yes. All yes. I just don't understand why this has anything to do with the GraphQL over HTTP specification, because this only has to define that I can send an ID, and it may or may not end up being resolved from somewhere.
It belongs to it because we want you, when you create your watch app, to be able to say, here's my GraphQL endpoint. Boom, example.com/GraphQL, and for it to know what to do. And that includes knowing where to send the trusted documents, because that's part of the GraphQL like build process. There are so many different ways of doing trusted documents. Like,
I figured this out over the capabilities API. It's a capability to support persistent operations. So,
but not if your server won't let you do the capabilities query, right? So then you go to /GraphQL/capabilities, and that's why it's part of the GraphQL over HTTP spec.
yeah, the capabilities endpoint might be, but not anything of the capabilities inside of this endpoint, because it's just going to be the capabilities of the server, right? It's going to be a list of capabilities.
I think we're talking at cross purposes and actually agreeing with each other.
I guess maybe.
Yes, the actual like individual specifications for the different ways of doing trusted documents, like uploading to a particular endpoint, or writing it directly to a database, or writing it to the file system, or whatever, those will live somewhere else and they will be indicated through capabilities. But over HTTP needs to have a way, when trusted documents are enabled, to tell you what that is. And at the moment, my proposal for that is a like /GraphQL/capabilities endpoint.
But this would just be the same capabilities that we talk about in the main work group, right?
I think it probably will be, yes. But keep in mind that your endpoint might not support queries. Like it might only support trusted documents. So you can't just send a query, right?
Yeah, but that can just be an alternative format to discover the queries, like what we do by default in our chocolate is we have a /GraphQL/schema.GraphQL where you can get DSL because that solves issue 300.
Yeah.
So
I think we should standardize that as part of the GraphQL over HTTP spec as well, by the way. Like just having a standard like /GraphQL/SDL endpoint that just serves up text slash GraphQL, is it? Application slash GraphQL? One of those. Um, that should be a standard endpoint. Like we should make that a standard endpoint.
Yeah. I mean, it would just be really nice if we would have a V1 of the specification at some point. So that's why I don't want to make too much. Like for me, persistent documents do not have, it's not, if we at the moment say that I can't remember, it's been too long since I've read the HTTP, the GraphQL over the HTTP specification. But if we at the moment say that you must provide a query, period, then we have to change this so that you can actually use trusted documents. What I would say is we shouldn't put into the specification is that a way to push, pull, whatever persistent operations, and B, to, like, if we need a capabilities endpoint, fine. I see that makes sense. If you do not allow any operations, then you need to have the capabilities endpoint. But for me, this isn't a feature specifically for persisted or trusted documents.
It's only needed because of them. If you require that you support queries, then you can just do a GraphQL introspection, right? So
well, we allow queries sometimes, but disallow introspection fields.
yeah, I have my own opinions on that, as
Yeah,
you know.
but that's safe in many, many different ways than it is if you just have an introspection field. Because the danger of allowing non-persistent operations is the ability to be scannable. It's very easy to find vulnerable servers because you can essentially just scan the internet. When there's queries which give you all information that you need, which work on all spec compliant servers because of introspection. So if these already run into issues, then you're already not on the target list of them, right? And then you have proper costs on top of it, and that already helps you out. So
yeah, do you also use a non-standard HTTP port number? Because that will protect you from a lot of the scanners as well.
yeah, that's a different thing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we could definitely do security through obscurity if we want to, but I am not a big fan of it personally. I think for the appendix that defines persisted documents at the moment, the way that I worked around this issue is that I effectively coined a new thing. So we have like a GraphQL request, and now we have a persisted document request. And so the persisted document request has basically the same shape as a GraphQL request, but without the query and plus the document ID. But it's really daft. It's really kind of awkward. And it means that there's all this additional like complexity in what was Appendix A and will, I guess, become Appendix B. Just because it's not baked directly into the spec, and having it in the spec would be a lot nicer. But yeah.
Right, I see.
I think if we want to get this spec out ASAP, we should get it out based on all the discussions that we've had in the past, because it already matches everything and like basically everyone's already compliant and it's fine. If we want to make it a breaking change, then let's like make it a proper breaking change and actually do something serious with it. That's basically where I think. But maybe the breaking change isn't such a big deal. I think it is, though. Honestly, I think it's a major signaling issue. I think saying that like we were happy, like just putting out a breaking change to the way to do GraphQL over HTTP because we got bullied on Reddit about HTTP status codes would be a bit lame.
Could we?
I think the
As-
people on Reddit are just annoyed that we always push our persistent operations to Reddit. So that's a bit
That is fair, yeah.
not releasing is also a choice. Like we have a choice, right? Make a breaking change, not make a breaking change, and make no choice, which is probably the worst one.
Make no choice and wait until there is a choice made for you. So if you're irrelevant because the machines took over, then so what?
The main the main motivation behind writing this GraphQL over HTTP spec, other than increasing interoperability, was to guide people towards using status codes. Like that was the motivation for this. So I definitely understand the motivation to just say, well, let's just require that they do it. But it's still just, it doesn't sit right with me to have GraphQL release essentially a breaking change that says everyone who implemented it up until this point that hasn't been deeply involved in our working group, that isn't, Apollo, Chili Cream, Graphile, the Guild, Shopify, Airbnb, anyone who's not like one of the GraphQL Meta, anyone who's not one of the GraphQL Foundation, like member organizations or one of the companies involved in the GraphQL working group, you're all now spec non-compliant. Like that just feels wrong. Like it doesn't set well with me.
They have never been, because there was not a spec in the first place. So that's my answer.
Right, but they've never been spec non-compliant either.
No, they've been in the void for years.
They followed the recommended practices that we put out there and that
They
we then
followed,
decided to formalize as a specification.
the draft specification. Yeah. I was going to say, can we ask those people? But we don't know those people. That's the point, right?
The point is, yeah, it's very hard to know who they are. There could be like 10 of them. There could be literally millions of them, because this is stuff that is in like YouTube videos, it's in documentation for various places. Like we don't know how many people have copied and pasted that.
And,
But
and
also, go on.
what is the impact for them? Like, suddenly they're not compliant, fine.
Yeah, so we've got basically a matrix, right? We've got legacy and future clients, and we've got legacy and future servers. And with the spec as it currently stands, we mark legacy clients as non-compliant. So we do explicitly do that, and we have done all along. But those are ones that basically don't set any like content type. And those have never really been valid, right? They've never really been valid because you have to have a content type if you're sending JSON. And then we say that a server should support the two types. So basically, anything that's any reasonable client that's more than just like curl minus X post double hyphen data that hasn't even put like a content type. Anything more than that, anything that's used double hyphen JSON is fine. No, that's not true. No. So we've said that any client that doesn't set the application GraphQL response plus JSON is non-compliant, is not a compliant client. So we've said you are non-compliant, but we let you through anyway. So like we don't break anything for you, we don't forbid anything for you, but we do say that you're not conforming to the spec. And it basically, the point of this is that going forward, clients must implement the spec. They must implement this new type, which then means that they must support status codes and so on. And essentially, it just means that these like command line scripts, they can continue to work forever. And these old servers, they can continue to work forever. But anyone who does a new server today or a new client today will use the new stuff. What this spec does is essentially it deletes one of those columns, I think. So it says a server must support the new thing, which is fine. It may support the old thing. So by default, it doesn't have to, which then means that any existing clients out there if their server framework that they're using, for example, chooses to upgrade to the new behavior and only implement what it must, then suddenly all those clients will stop working. But that would be a breaking release anyway for that server. It also means that for a new server, none of those legacy clients that exist, like the old versions of GraphQL on NPM, or the, I don't know, various command line utilities that people have baked into various tools, the like, I don't know, ancient Apollo CLI that maybe existed and people used at one point, or whatever, any of these different things that just use the standard behavior, all of these commands that exist in tutorials of like, here's how you get the SDL. You run the GraphQL get SDL command or whatever through this module that's no longer maintained. Anything like that will not work with these new GraphQL servers because they aren't required to support that legacy protocol. So there is like all this like dead long tail of unmaintained documentation that references unmaintained modules that exist in various places that can talk GraphQL to things. Those things will not work against new GraphQL servers. And people who like go onto Google and find the wrong page or go onto ChatGPT and like get given the wrong prompt because it's pulled it out of the wrong like old documentation, they are going to like run the command and they're going to get an error and they're not going to understand it. And the main issue is I don't understand why we are doing that when literally the amount of code to support these legacy clients is like 3 lines.
Yeah, and new server will continue to support it. Just it will not be in the spec. Like the new Apollo server will still honor application JSON requests for like 5 years. I don't know. I don't want to speak for them. But if you take a new server today, it like every popular server will probably keep supporting the old stuff for some time. And then we have a good update path because in 5 years, we hopefully all those old tutorials will start to fade. The machine will rewrite the internet. And when the maintainers will believe it's a time they can remove the support. But it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I mean, we can try and rely on Bitrot, but like one of the main founding principles of the web was like permalinks for a reason. So I think hoping that this content, especially these like, hundreds of hours of or millions of hours of stuff uploaded to YouTube, who knows, and all these like articles and all these blog posts and stuff, hoping that they all basically go away because certainly those modules that have become unmaintained, they're not going to suddenly become maintained again. Like they're going to be out there for basically forever. And that's fine. Maybe like, yeah, you shouldn't be using a module that's not been updated for the last 10 years. Like that's your problem. Use a more modern one. Sure. But like many of these modules that are in this situation, they'll have the right name. They'll be called GraphQL, right? Because they were first to the post and now they're unmaintained. And like, yeah, so sure you can use like, I don't know, @graphql / do the thing. But like the GraphQL command, maybe not. And like this applies to like all the different ecosystems, right? So there is risk attached to this. It's not as simple as just being like, yeah. I still think it's the wrong move, personally. I think putting it out as a breaking change is a mistake. I don't see it as being worth the trade-off. I understand like the desire for purity, but like there's no reason, like if a server in the future wants to stop supporting application JSON, they can totally do that. Any server can reject any GraphQL request for any reason. That's entirely within your permissions. Like you run the service.
But if it's in the spec, people won't do it. I think if we want people to adopt the new media type,
There's nothing in the spec that says that you're allowed to do depth limits at validation time, and people do it.
some people do it.
Yeah, there's nothing in the spec that says you're allowed to disable introspection. In fact, the spec says you must support introspection, and yet we do it, right? We turn off introspection.
Yeah.
So don't tell me that just because it's not in the spec, people don't do it. Like they definitely do. They definitely do. And if for your like pipeline that you described earlier, where now you have to write two different payload types in your observability pipeline, like, well, just reject it. Just reject it up front. If none of your clients need it, then you can reject it, and it's fine. It's not going to cause you any problems. Like, you can do that. What we are dictating here is what servers that, like, Apollo server and GraphQL Yoga and GraphServe and all the other servers out there should do. And that is to be maximally compatible, because that is literally like our whole job as writing these specs is to increase compatibility, right? It's to increase interoperability and compatibility. And I think what we're trying to do with this change, making this a must, is essentially we are putting the best practices into the specification, which is exactly the issue that Pascal had with the, like, should we do trusted documents by default? And yeah, if we were to start the GraphQL over HTTP spec again from scratch, I think I would probably say that we should only support trusted documents, and that anyone who wants to run a public API, they should have a way of allowing you to register trusted documents as an untrusted party. And like, sure, like now maybe there's a bit of a handshake and you have to go through this and it gets its validation and then it gets a hash and then you can send the hash. Yeah, I think that would be a better situation than the world that we have today. But that ship sailed. So I think we want to increase interoperability, and we don't do that by breaking things that's already out there.
It might increase interoperability in the long term, though. Because I'm going back to it, but in 20 years from now, people will look at that JSON thing and will not get what it is. And we'll have the same question. So we're keeping, it's a trade-off. It's always a trade-off. Like it's whether we want to favor the future or the current thing.
I favor the next 5 years. That's what I favor. And I favor backwards compatibility. So I also favor the previous 11 years. So the previous 11 years and the next 5 years. That's the bit that I care about. But
right.
let's put it to the rest of the TSC. Let's put it to the main working group and see, like, if there's consensus.
Yeah, I was thinking, how can we tell? But it's really hard. Like it all boils down to intuition at the end of the day, because we don't have the data. Like, it's all open source. We don't know what's going to break.
This is the worst thing about this for me, is like, we literally do not know what we're going to be breaking by making this change. Like, there's so many things out there that people have done, that people have built, that blog posts that they've written, software that they've released, and we don't know what out of that we're going to break. We don't know what out of that is going to be like a key part of someone's workflow. Like, and I honestly don't see the value of what we're doing here to be high enough to justify that break. If we were doing the trusted documents by default thing, I would see the value of that as being high enough, because that would kind of force people to do what, honestly, I think the vast majority of them should be doing. And it would fix major security vulnerabilities, like, across the entire GraphQL ecosystem. All this change does is breaks a whole bunch of people just to mean that you can use like 294 and 400. It's really not.
Yeah, and the cost of the break, I mean, I'm pretty sure like people who will break will have a easy solution. Like if your system breaks because of application JSON, you probably have a good workaround that is not too costly. Like if you mandate persisted queries, now you have to implement a bunch of stuff. So it's not really comparable, I would say, in the sense that the cost of each breaking change is not the same.
Yeah, it's essentially, are we calling this a new specification,
Yeah.
which would be the trusted documents, or are we calling it the old specification, like a specification of what we already had, which would be the existing one, and this change sits in the middle. It's kind of a new specification, right? Because it doesn't apply to the things that were out for like the first 5 years of GraphQL. So it's kind of
Yep.
new, but it's also kind of not as new. It's not as much of an effort. I'd also argue that like people who there are so many companies out there that have built stuff and now have like I forget what the right term is, but like a small crew of people maintaining it, much smaller than the crew that built it. And for them, even a change like just these status codes things could be quite challenging. Like maybe they've got people that can keep things basically ticking over, but they don't know how to mess with the Nginx configuration settings or the I don't know whatever else it is that's like going to cause problems with this, or that script that someone's running on that computer in the closet that no one's checked on for 7 years. Like that script has stopped working, and now we're no longer like requesting this medication that's meant to be requested every week, and no one knows why, and we can't find the server that runs it. Like there's so many stories like that in the IT sector of like the closet computer that you had to track down by periodically turning off one switch after the other until you find which electrical circuit it's on. Like, yeah, it just doesn't seem worth breaking it for something so minor.
If this is the case, they should just not update their server nor their clients. Like they should just keep everything untouched and they will have no problem. Just don't update anything. But anyway, let's discuss it next week. I think we have a primary working group next week, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I'll put it to the agenda there, see what everyone thinks.
Okay.
Okay, guys. Good talks.
Yeah.
Catch you later.
Ciao,
I'm going
ciao.
to feed the monster.
Yeah.
See you. You.